This time in the Magic Kitchen, we are joined by author Jamie Waggoner for a discussion on Hades, myth, magic, and modern devotion.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elise Wells.
And welcome to the Magic Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
Hey there, witches. Did you know that there's an entire community out there dedicated to you and your journey? The Rebel Mystic community is a space where I offer my decades of knowledge and experience to witches just like you. I do this through live events, monthly mentoring, monthly rituals, a book club, and other resources like workbook pages and meditations. There is even a complete self-paced course library you can access. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about this community and how to become a member. Blessed be.
So I got to fill our listeners in because we're still laughing about it. Like we end up talking, like we just get on and we start talking, we start chit chatting about, what's going on. We forget to hit record so you guys can hear all this stuff. So I made us stop and now we're recording. So let's talk.
So we have some wonderful updates for you all. You may remember, and he actually makes an appearance in the episode on animal familiars coming out.
Yes.
With Dodie Graham McKay. Her book, The Witch's Ally, is all about working with familiars and specifically animal familiars. Yep. So Greg the cat, if you follow me on social media, if you're in my Facebook group, Seekers of the Sacred Wild, you've been following his journey. In Greece, we are very fortunate to be the caretakers of a cat colony of about 36 cats. And it is now one cat short because there was a cat called Greg that we loved the most. And he loved us a lot. And he really preferred humans to cats. And so when we were coming back to the US for this long visit, I said, I think I just have a bad feeling about little Greg. So we took him to the vet, and it turns out he has a genetic kidney disease. He's not deadly or dying or anything like that, but he has this disease that requires him to have prescription food, which there was no world where he was going to get that living on the street. So we started the process about 5 months ago maybe. And long story short, through us fostering him, and then when we left for the US, my mom fostered him, and then my aunt traveled to Greece for fun. She was visiting my mom. And she took Greg back with her. And so then I was fostering him in the US. And then the most beautiful thing happened. We found him a forever home. And not just any forever home. It is with a sister, a fellow priestess, who just walks this path so authentically and with so much love and with so much gratitude. And just no one could deserve this perfect cat more than her. So if you're listening, I'm just so happy for the two of you to be together. And Greg also has her whole family loving on him. So I actually just last night, as of recording this, took him to his new mama, and they were instantly hitting it off. And it just, so special. And it's been really fun to reflect on, land stewardship extends when we open ourselves up to it. We start off with a relationship with the land spirits simply going outside. And then suddenly stray cats seem to like us. And then before you know it, if you're like me and you live in a place like Greece, you end up with a colony finding you.
Yes,
and
the cat distribution system works.
Yeah. And it became, part of my spiritual practice to take care of these cats. And for anyone wondering, while we're in the US, my grandparents live nearby. So they actually come over and they make sure that, because the cats have, guys, these cats are like living better than most of us. Like they literally have a catio that is like like a 500 square foot indoor space only for them. And they have heaters throughout the winter. And in the
Nice.
summer, it opens on all sides so they can get fresh air. Like they literally are living their absolute best lives. And then they have 2 unlimited food stations and 4 unlimited water stations, all behind a fence so they can't get attacked by any like stray, feral dogs or anything. So they're living very, very good lives. Not to mention my parents also like love the cats, so they stop by and take them to the vet if anyone needs anything. So it's really like a beautiful ecosystem of love and care that these animals invited us to be a part of. And just special. And I wanted to update anybody who was wondering about Lil Greg. And
Look, Greg.
if anyone's ever wondering, like how do I get a Greek cat? Are there more to be had? Yes. In my colony, there are 4 others that most are feral, honestly. Like they're not feral in a scary way. They're just not going to be the best house pets. But there are 4 others that are in the queue that we would love to get homes for. So if you are curious or would love to, keep up with that, my mom actually runs a Facebook group where she shares her updates because she's the one who got started on, like, she made the connection for the vet that we use for the sterilizations now and the checkups. And so she actually runs all of that, and she'd love to have you be a part of it.
Awesome.
And also, if you come to my retreat in Delphi, you will meet many cats. And you could just decide then which one do I want to take home.
Which do you like?
Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
actually, on note of that retreat, early bird ends December 15th. And you don't have to be paid in full at that time, but you have to have your deposit in. And people have been messaging me like, I would like a payment plan. Of course. Everybody needs a payment plan.
Sure.
We've got a million options. And they just launched a new payment plan option through PayPal called Pay Later. And it adds no fees. And you can set up payment plans going out up to 2 years. So it is a pretty great option. And I would just love to have you there. If you're called to the priestess path, this is the retreat for you. It is literally, talk about epic priestesses of history. The Pythia, we're going to meet her.
Yeah. I know. I feel like we also have the Winter Witches Party coming up.
Yes, next week.
Yes, already.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, I remember like when Wendy messaged us. Wendy Mata is hosting this one. Bruja Botanica hosts a lot of wonderful summits that we get to be a part of. When she messaged us, I was like, "Oh wow, yeah, that sounds great." Like,
yeah,
I couldn't even
fun.
picture Christmas at the time.
No.
And now here we are. Yuletide is.
I feel like I'm still in Salem with Wendy and Tanae, like talking about it. Not that it's right around the corner. Like the time, where did 2024 go? It is so gone already. But yeah, if you haven't gotten your tickets for the Winter Witches Party, Winterfest, get it, because we have some really cool people in there. People that we have had on the podcast, people that we've met in person. And I love it. I love doing these events because it gives you that diversity of paths, the diversity of, okay, this person does it this way. This person does it that way. Oh, I like that point of view. Okay, I can adopt that into my path. I can learn from this person. I can learn from that person. Yeah. And it shows like this diversity in our craft, in our crafts, plural, that they all play nice together. They play really well together. We were just having a conversation with Nicholas Pearson about like how each of us takes different perspectives of things. And it all meshes. It all comes back to this central point of, okay, it works. They all work together. I love it. So yeah, these parties are great. These events are great. And
for those of you who are like, oh, I work that time, the beauty of this ticket is it's really one of a kind. Like it's only $27 to be there. And that includes a lifetime access to the recordings,
the replays
of all 10 of these workshops. And I would say just reading through them and knowing both of our contributions, they're very active. Like I'm going to be guiding you through breath work to warm your body when it's cold outside, as well as a meditation to meet the warmth of winter, to really set you up to not have that. We can get negative in the wintertime. We can get down on ourselves at the time of winter.
Cold
it can be very isolating. And so I didn't realize this until I was looking at the schedule, but I'm kicking it off. I'm the first event on the 12th, introducing the whole thing. And then, it's what I would say is like, if you're like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to make it live. I love these summits and events because I put them on in the background for company. There's
Yeah.
been times in my life, I mean, we all remember 4 years ago during COVID, like just feeling lonely, you know, not feeling very surrounded by people like us. And these summits and these events give us that company. And then you have lifetime access. So you get to go back, you know, let's say it's mid-January and you're like, oh my God, I'm so over winter. It's awful. Well, go back to my meditation. Do it one more time.
Yeah.
See what you can find. And so like $27, like it's like $2 a workshop, you know, it's crazy.
Right.
It's such
really
good
is.
value.
It's a good value.
It's a Yuletide present for sure.
In my workshop, I am going to lead you through some warming winter teas because it's all about the alchemy of tea and bringing that warmth into your life through sipping a nice, comforting, warming, soothing, healthy beverage. And I have a recipe that I'm going to offer everyone so that you can make it yourself if you want. And you can really just embody this energy of, you know, celebration with one another and bringing winter. Like when I think of this, when I'm thinking of this party, like I like see snow, but I see those, you know how you put the lights in the snow, like the ice lights with the candles. That's like that soothing, but yet it's cold out, sure, but it's still that soothing, like illuminating aspect to it. Like you have, you know, the lights in the trees and just the more cheery aspect of winter instead of the dark and cold all the time.
Yeah. I think and we all need a bit of positivity right now. And that's really the theme of this party. I feel like that's what Wendy said when she messaged us too. She was like, she's like,
it's supposed to be a party. Yeah.
She's like, I want to host a party. We need a party in the witch community. And I could not agree more.
Absolutely. Oh, let's see what else is going on. Oh, yes. So I've had people messaging me about this for weeks, and it's finally ready. So the Gardens of the Mystic, you can apply to join now. It is ready. You can go to leandrawitchwood.com and find either the quiz if you want to take the quiz, or just go to the page and apply for the program. But it is ready, and we're going to start January. And I'm going to start walking you through all the different Gardens of the Mystic. And this is a metaphorical journey. So we are literally sitting down, learning about the different archetypes within the gardens. And we're going to start with the primordial. We're moving on to the Garden of the Gods, the Garden of Rampart. So they're all going to embody certain aspects of the individual. So I was talking to someone about it, and they're like, oh my God, she's like, you're going to change my next 6 months. I'm like, yes. So if you're looking to make a difference in your life and you don't know where to start, and you've looked back in the past 6 months of your life, you're like, what did I do? I didn't do much. This is your chance to take the next 6 months of your life and transform yourself, connect yourself, and develop a community base for yourself. And I've already had a few people sign up. So yes, thank you for joining us. Like, I'm super excited about this. We're starting conversations, and we're ready. We're excited. And so this whole program, it's big. It's an 18-month program in total, but I break it up in 6-month chunks so that you can, if you need to, in our tradition, what we do is we take, I guess what you would call a sabbatical. And we typically would be 6 to 9 months. You work, you practice, you learn, you take the knowledge of your mentor, you apply it, and then you take a break. And you can do that. You don't have to, but that's why I have it in 6-month chunks. So you can take that break when you need it. So you're not just like constantly like nose to the grindstone, go, 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 because this isn't about that hustle culture mentality. It's about embodying these archetypes. So it's about slowing down and asking yourself how this archetype fits in your life and how you relate to it. So yeah, we're going to learn a lot about connecting with the gods, learning about connecting with our creative side. And while it is a priestess path, it is not exclusively female. This is the archetype of these different gardens. So you don't have to be, biologically female to join this program, even though it does have a very feminine aspect to it. But some of the concepts we're going to talk about are masculine, that sacred masculine in there. But it all relays into the priestess archetype, which is important for our times right now. Our times are very uncertain right now. And I think embodying that matriarchic energy is going to be where we need to go. And I'm super excited to do this, and I can't wait. So yeah, check it out, leandrawitchwood.com. And I hope to see you in the community. I hope to see you in the program.
Jamie Waggoner is a pagan priestess, philosopher, writer, and teacher. She co-founded The Way of Weaver, a gender-inclusive program of magical inquiry, social justice, and community building. Jamie has studied folklore, mythology, and the occult for more than 20 years and has been a devotee of Hades since 2016. You can learn more at jamiewaggoner.com, and that is in the show notes as well. So thank you for being here, Jamie. This book was like,
yes,
I've been buzzing to talk about it all week. I was like holding myself back from like emailing you with like, oh my God, I just love this. Oh, this part was really good. Because I was like, wait, no, save it for the interview.
Save it.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and to talk about Hades.
Yes.
Yeah. He's very underrated. Like you say in your introduction, like he's well known, but he doesn't really get his proper due as a figure, as a god.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting because he also has people have very dramatic reactions to Hades. They tend to, either, they have like some very common misconceptions about him based on sort of like the pop culture references to Hades that are very pervasive, or they're actually entirely scared of him for one reason or another. So it's really interesting. Yeah, he's he is, one of his epithets is the unseen one, and for millennia he has been very much largely unseen in that way. It really rings true, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Wow. Yeah, I was taken to a place with Hades during reading this book that I always knew was there. And I don't know if that was what you intended, to like connect the reader to what you know about him versus what we're told about him. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the way you allowed the stories to come through in a modern sense.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Each chapter in the book, it starts with sort of a narrative piece that's told in Hades' voice. And, for my own magical practice for many years now, these are all conversations that I've had with Hades in Trance Journey, which is a huge component of my magical practice. And I'm very much a believer in going to the source to really ask questions about the myths and the things that were written down, because those things are written down by humans with our typical like human filters and biases and things like that, our kind of agendas, where they be hidden or obvious. And so, he was really, I think, generous in this process of sort of sharing and explaining more about himself so that we can have a more complete picture of who he is, and especially why he might still be very relevant today. So I also really enjoyed the process of getting to know him better myself as I was working on the book.
I really appreciate that, because it echoed a little bit of my own personal journey. I work with plants. So part of my work with plants and learning to use the plants for either medicinal or magical purposes is to listen to the plant. Let the plant teach me. Let the plant speak to me. Let the plant tell me its mythology, its meaning, its purpose. And I always feel like I'm stepping into that woo circle because people ask me, well, how did you blend this? I'm like, the plant told me.
No, I understand completely. I'm a plant lady myself, and I talk to all my plants all the time in the waking world and in the other world. So I'm right there with you.
Wonderful.
And actually, to speak a bit about trance journeying, because I think people, I get the question so often, they're like, well, how do I actually talk to the deity? And I'm like, trance meditation, like, oh, but I can't meditate. Like they want to strike it off the list and do something else. And it's kind of maybe it falls flat for some people and they're like disappointed by this, but that is, in my experience, that is the best way. And almost the only way. And we'll talk about visiting sacred places and, other ways for sure. But I want to ask you about trance meditation, because you talk about something that I don't call it the HQ, but that is exactly what it is. I tell people, like, you need to find, I call it your touchstone place, like the place that you've arrived. And like, for me, I won't give too many details because it's like, my place, but it's a grassy hill. And I meditate often in my house because I don't want to get distracted by like a bug flying in my face or something. So when I'm trance journeying, I do usually do this indoors, but it's when I'm sitting on the corner of my bed or on my chair or whatever, but I feel it change to grass, if that makes sense. Like, and then I can look around, in quotation marks, in that headquarters at that HQ, and I've arrived. And that's when the journey begins. And sometimes reaching that can take 10 minutes. Sometimes that can take an hour and a half. Like, and I think that dedication, like people are like, how do I dedicate myself to a God? How do I show I'm dedicated? How do I devote? And yeah, you can do the formal oaths and all those things, but that is where it starts, is having the dedication to say, I'm going to meet you where you are. And I know I have to take the time and effort to get there. And trance is that way. I mean, it's that way.
Yeah. I mean, I approach deity, like being a devotee or being dedicated to a deity. I approach it just like a human relationship. Like I wouldn't really, I would not like walk up and dedicate my life to a stranger that I don't know, or someone that, that I only read about on the internet and, hadn't really had conversations with, hadn't spent time with, hadn't, kind of had the chance to be with them and feel their energy and get to know them, right? And so just like other relationships, you have to build that over time. And the way I like to do that, the primary way, is through trance journey. And, it can be different for different people. And I think that maybe that's one thing that people don't realize is that, for some people, going into sort of a meditative state where you kind of send your consciousness out into like another realm or another dimension, another plane, whatever, word you want to use for it. Sometimes people experience it like a movie, right? Like they're just kind of there, like a movie or a dream, and they're sort of, watching everything around them, and it's very visual. And they come back with sort of like this whole, like, sort of like, story from beginning to end of what happened. But that doesn't happen for everybody. And that's okay too, right? Because sometimes we get information in trance journey that comes in through our other senses. People sometimes get smells. Sometimes people will hear a song lyric or be reminded of a poem or hear a word that they don't know in a foreign language that they've never studied, right? And so they come back and they do the research to look it up. You can feel a sensation in your body, and that's how you know you're in the presence of a certain deity or a certain plant spirit, like Leandra was saying. So there's different ways that information comes in. There's also, going into the meditative state, going into the trance journey state, and then coming out of it, you can also kind of walk around in the world and see what synchronicities happen after, right? Because things might continue to play out in the waking world because of the work you've been doing. Does that make sense? So I think that sometimes people don't realize that there's so many ways that you can that you get information from deities and also can spend time with them and build relationship with them.
Yeah. And what you said about that spillover into the world, the waking world. Exactly. That's I think how it was quote unquote real, because that word is complicated, but like when we want to second guess those meditative experiences, like, and then we see the crow or the heron or what we're looking for, like that's the moment that it all feels real.
And I also think it's this misconception that you have to sit for hours. Like, you don't have to. Like, it can come instantly. You can be sitting there for 5 minutes and all of a sudden you've got everything you need. You don't have to keep searching. But you could be sitting there for an hour and a half sometimes, but not all the time. So,
and I have friends that also, I mean, they like to walk like as they're meditating. Of course, you have to do that in a safe place, right? You're not going to want to do that on a busy street just in case you're not fully there and being, attending to your own personal safety. So, you got to choose where you're walking. But, there are people that like to swim and meditate. There are people that like to walk and meditate, dance and meditate, so you can incorporate like physicality into it. You don't have to sit cross-legged for an hour until your knees hurt to make it happen. So, yeah.
Very good. Yeah. I walk and meditate, but I also vocalize and meditate. So if you sing or if you chant, it's perfect. It's interactive and you don't have to, make your legs fall asleep or.
Yeah. I've certainly tranced out from music before through like chanting, like just repetitive chanting, because you kind of like there's at some point you sort of go on autopilot, right? And so your mind is free to sort of journey where it wants to go. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, sound is so powerful. Is your intuition tugging at you to deepen your relationship with your higher self? Do you feel like there is a greater mystery to your spiritual path and you're ready to go back to the roots of earth priestessing to discover it? Are you dreaming of caves, bowls of red roses, or having visions of barefoot women in white gowns? The priestess path is calling to you. This is an invitation to call on the oracle and be anointed in the Pythia's sacred spring at Delphi. I am inviting you to dance with the nymphs to the beat of my drum in an ancient forest. Let's meet the muses in the olive groves, swim with the mermaids, release your fears, and embrace the power of the priestess you know you are meant to be. If you're ready to meet the land spirits and oracles of Greece's most famous sacred site and beyond, visit seekingnumina.com/Delphi retreat and sign up to join me. Early bird ends December 15th. It was interesting the way you wrote about the formal conflation of Christian and pagan concepts of the underworld. And I love that you brought up Dante's Inferno as sort of the catalyst for that. Like I never put together, but you're right. Like the underworld in Western society is associated with hell. And that's really not the way the ancients saw the underworld. So
No.
What are some misconceptions about the underworld and about Hades that people tend to have?
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that. So, what you're talking about is there, a couple major things that happened to confuse Hades, the god, with the Christian devil, and also the underworld with the Christian hell. And just, one other thing that can also confuse people is sometimes Hades refers to Hades the god, and sometimes Hades refers to his realm. But when I speak about it, I always use the term underworld to refer to the realm, just so there's clarity there. So what happened is when, the Bible was being codified and written down, the Old Testament was in Hebrew, but the New Testament was in Greek. When they were writing it down. And there's an Old Testament word called Sheol, and it refers to a certain realm or place of the dead. And that word was translated as Hades, basically, when it got written down into the New Testament, even though those two concepts themselves, those two words and the things that they represent are not equivalent, really. And so that just kind of continued. So that was already, in the Bible, sort of that lost in translation piece. And then we get to the medieval poet Dante and his Divine Comedy, and especially the Inferno. So, one of the things Dante did is he took lots of different figures from Greek and Roman mythology and society and just sort of sprinkled them throughout his book. And, that text has been highly influential. Like I took a Western literature class in college, and the Inferno was one of the texts that we read. And so, Dante sort of, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Dante, in doing that, kind of left us with that legacy, and it still sort of influences, what people think they know about Hades and the underworld today. But in reality, Hades and the underworld they're just simply not equivalent to, to the Christian devil or the
Makes
Christian
sense.
hell. They're two totally and complete different sets of mythology. And I hope I don't offend people by calling Christian, the Bible and Christianity and the stories in it mythology, but I mean, they really are. I mean, that's not a way of, downgrading them or disrespecting them, because I highly respect mythology. I mean, my whole spiritual belief system is based on mythology. So, we can't, that's not a negative for me, but that's where there's just not an equivalency between the two, and I think that really influences people. I think some other common misconceptions about Hades is that he's the god of death, or that like the god of death as, that he's someone who comes to get you when you die, or that he chooses the time of your death, and neither of those things are true. There is a daemon, which is kind of where we get the word demon, but a daemon in this reference means a being that's not quite a god, not quite a human, kind of an in-between sort of being named Thanatos, who is actually the daemon of death, who is the one that comes to get you at the end of life and guides your soul to the shores of the river Styx. And so it's not Hades at all. And in fact, Hades doesn't really have anything to do with the time you die either. That's the fates. There's a trio of goddesses that spin out your life, measure the days and years of it, and at the end of it, basically cut it with a pair of sharp sewing shears. And they kind of decide the day and hour of that. Another misconception about him is that he's some sort of judge or punisher of the dead, and that is simply not true as well. Hades actually has a trio of judges that you kind of, when you're sort of processed, like kind of almost like you're going through like immigration or customs at the airport, right? It's like when you're processed, when you're going into the underworld, you come up in front of this trio of judges, and they're not really there to punish you. They're sort of just kind of sorting you out to the area that you belong to. And, and there's different areas depending on how you lived your life, but they're not really punishing you except in some very extreme cases. And in those extreme cases, a lot of times it's not Hades that passes judgment. It's actually Persephone. And, which, kind of leads me to another misconception, which is that he's the scarier of the two, which is not true in my experience. So
I definitely got that from your book. Like, Persephone's the one that you need to be careful of. Like, she is that great and terrible queen.
Yeah. She's phenomenal. She is phenomenal, and she's formidable. Both of those things.
And I love how you highlighted how she is the spring maiden, but also that queen of the underworld. So she has that duality, but more than duality, like she's multifaceted, which is really how all of us are. And, going into how you explain, like letting the mythology come, let them tell you their story so that you can apply it to you, so they can speak directly to you. And that's seeing that and connecting it to who we are as individuals and who the deities are. They're not these one-sided, whitewashed, glitter dusted beings that, are cute to, research once in a while.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think this kind of comes from my animist view of, I have an animist worldview in general, but I also have an animist view of myth and story. And I don't think that deities are some sort of, preserved in some sort of time capsule and never change, right? Because that's not true of us. That's not true of the world. I don't know why that would be true of them. So that's why I always think it's very important to ask them, what's the relevancy of your story now? Like, what do we need to know now? Or, please tell me, like, whenever I was working with Hades to write the narrative pieces for the book, we have these conversations where I explain, like, this is the audience, this is the potential audience that's going to be reading this. So what's important for them to know at this point in time?
I just love that. And I really appreciate your unapologetic exploration of personal gnosis, because as we know in the craft for like ever, we've kind of been told like, oh, that's for you, it's not invalid, but don't write it in a book, like it's kind of an unspoken thing. Like we're supposed to only look to these ancient texts, which for most mythologies we don't even really have. In Greece, sure, we do have a lot of written record, but even that's so localized. Like I always stress to people, like we don't really know what the rural people of Arcadia were doing. We just know what the Athenians chose to keep recorded, because
exactly.
We're the bureaucrats, So we still are grasping at straws with that. And like you said, who wrote what the texts we have? Humans. So it's still personal gnosis. It's always been personal gnosis. So I just appreciated the way, as an author, I was just blown away with your structure of this book and the way you were able to have a bibliography that reads like a PhD thesis, but still not be afraid to be like, and this is how I see him, though. Like it was just brilliant.
Oh, thanks. Well, I tried to definitely very clearly delineate when I was speaking from my own personal gnosis versus speaking about like a primary source text or even a secondary interpretation of a primary source by a classicist or something like that. Because I think, sharing gnosis is one of the things I really enjoy about magic. I love it. Yeah, I love it.
So much
fun when we have a shared ritual experience together, or, maybe we all do a trance journey and then come back and talk about it, or we cast a spell and then we come back and talk about it. And that gnosis sharing is really great. It's really, it's really awesome. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for that. When I'm teaching, I always encourage people to do a number of things. And it's whether they're starting to research a deity or start a relationship with a different, an unseen spirit being of some sort, or even looking up things about a plant, anything like that. What I encourage people to do is kind of in three parts. So in the first thing I want them to do is go to a primary source, whether that be a source text, a piece of art. It can be lots of different things. So go to a primary source. That means it's the closest to the original source that we possibly can get that's not been reinterpreted a second or third time, right? And then the second thing I want them to do is to go into Trance Journey and ask about what was written down versus what's important to know. And then the third thing after that is to talk to someone and ask them what they think, or go and Google it, or go to the library or explore the fan fiction. But that's like the last thing you should do, right? Because I think it's kind of important to ground yourself in the primary source, find out what you really need to know by going directly there in Trance Journey, and then explore kind of the other opinions, because I don't want those other opinions that are out there to have too much influence at the early stages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And then there is just like an overwhelming amount of interpretations a person's going to come across. So if they can go into that side of research with their own opinions of, experience, it's going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah. And it was interesting writing Hades, because there was a point where my first draft was due to the publisher, and I literally had to stop researching. I literally had to stop myself, because you can just kind of keep going and going and going. Once you kind of open, like, you find all those little like rabbit holes and all those little like, tributary streams that you want to follow and all these different things. So there's always a point where you have to kind of quit and leave it for the next one, I guess.
True. It's ready. You don't have to wait any longer. You have been waiting for this. You've been asking me for this for months. And it's ready. So the Gardens of the Mystic program, the program that everyone has been yearning for, is now available. You can go to the show notes to get more information, or visit leandrawitchwood.com. But this is your certification program. This is your initiation program. This is the program you have been looking for
that moves you beyond the cusp of beginnerhood, of that novice. And we will dive in to each garden, metaphorically, of course, and we will learn those esoteric nuances that you crave, those connections you crave, the connections to those archetypes of the protector, of the mystic, of the seer, the garden of the gods, where you will join with your higher power and the powers of the universe to live your most magical and authentic life. So if you're ready for this, if you're ready to jump in, the first 6 months are starting in January. And this is part 1, Sanctuary 1 of a 3-part 18-month program. So if you're ready to jump in, go over to the show notes or go to leandrawitchwood.com and get more information. Blessed be.
I have a question about the topography of the underworld. You talk about karst hydrology.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. I want to make sure I wrote it right because my notes are like giving me the red squiggly, but
Yeah. So I actually learned about that from a book called Underland. And the book is by, I know I'm looking in my own bibliography right now. So his name is Robert, and I would just want to say his last name correctly. I think his last name is McFarlane. Yes, Robert McFarlane. Underland, A Deep Time Journey. And if you've never read that book, it's really good. It's basically kind of a travel log type of book. It's like a travel memoir. But he's traveling through areas in Greece and Italy and other places where there is what's called karst, and that's Karst. It's a kind of like formation of the landscape where you've got like sinkholes, you've got underground rivers that appear and disappear, you've got cave systems and all kinds of things like this. And the fact that the land that these myths, not only not only the myth of Hades and Persephone in the underworld, but all of the mythology, honestly, coming from out of Greece, Italy, Turkey, some of the places that McFarlane mentions, is really influenced by the fact that this is the landscape, right? So it makes a lot of, the underworld itself, the fact that you have to cross a river, the fact that there's, there's different places, there's caves, there's Tartarus, which is like a deep, deep sinkhole or a pit. It reflects the actual landscape of the place in a really beautiful way. And I feel like mythology does that. In basically every culture around the world. I think that stories kind of arise out of the landscape, and it sort of frames the way that the stories are told. So, yeah, but I highly recommend his work. He's very good.
oh, that's fantastic. I just added
Adding
that.
it to my list.
I just added it to my TBR.
Yeah, Underland, A Deep Time Journey. Yeah.
We'll put it in the show notes for everybody too, because that is just what I was looking for, honestly. Like, I feel like my main work is with land spirits and how the land informs our mythology and our practice today, even when we don't necessarily realize it. And it's the egregore of the space as well that plays into it. If you live in a city versus the country, like digging beneath those layers of egregore to actually connect to the land in a city is harder. And I do feel like there is something important in these places that the ancients worked with. Like, I would never say to somebody like, you can't work with a deity from Greece in another country because they're not there. Like, of course they are. They're gods. They can go wherever they want. But it gives so much context to get to see these places in person.
Yeah, it really does. And I've traveled extensively in Italy, and a lot of the places that I mentioned in the book that I've been to, especially, like the cave of the Cumaean Sibyl and, some of the landscape that's around the Bay of Naples, places like that, I find really, really interesting. And, you can kind of, as you're walking through these spaces, you can kind of feel sort of the echoes of time and like the echoes of stories. And it really gives you a very embodied, like visceral sense of the story that you don't get if you've not been there yet. So, and I know that,
exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Like about like that Bay of Naples. And and in the south of Italy in general, like, and maybe part of this is what I didn't know then, but the karst hydrology systems and things. But I remember looking out at a landscape. There was a church there, but there had been a temple. Temple was destroyed. Situations like that are common in the Mediterranean, and it
Yeah.
just felt magical. I mean, I work with land spirits, but I was with my family, so I wasn't about to do a big ritual, and I just sort of took time on my own in this corner of the church that was just overlooking a totally barren, otherwise wild area. And it reminded me of ways I felt the presence of like the fairies, in a sense, in Ireland or something. Like you almost feel somebody creeping around a rock to look at you or watch you, and just they're curious about what you're doing. And it was so vivid and so alive. And when I was reading those, I loved that you put sacred places in each chapter. My business is called Seeking Numina, which means seeking sacred places.
That's awesome.
As you know.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I was just charmed to see them brought in because they are so worth exploring.
Yeah, I think that landscape is important to understand. And I think it's a way that we can avoid just co opting or appropriating things, right? Because if we can understand more about the place where something emerges, that just increases our connection with it. It increases our ability to sort of understand from the perspective of the peoples and the places that it arose from. And also we can give back, right? Like, so when we go and visit places, we support the people that have like the stewards of the land and the stewards of these stories for millennia. And so we kind of support them with our activities as well. So I think that there's lots of ways that is a really key part of magical practice or of pagan devotion. And I know that travel's not always accessible for everyone, and that's totally fine too. And so that's why in the book, I also kind of give like, if you can't actually go on a physical pilgrimage, here are some ways to do it virtually or some other, other things that you can do. But yeah, I encourage people, even if it's just looking at pictures on the internet of some of these places, I think that, or watching, a documentary on whatever streaming service you have, things like that. I think that will also sort of inform your magical practice. And again, like you can, get to know a different facet of someone like Hades, who's a little bit more difficult to find.
I like that. Like he's a little more difficult, but he seems so accessible. Like through your book, I felt like I knew him a lot better. And yeah, it's like his you see how he transforms himself in the abduction of Persephone. Like, would she have said yes? That was like, oh, I love that. Yeah, speak more.
Yeah. So, well, I have a couple thoughts about that. Hades he's not, I don't really, having, knowing him like I know him now, I don't think he is purposefully mysterious. I don't think he's trying to be avoidant or cagey or anything like that. I think that he sees things from a very different perspective. I talk in the book how he almost has like a geological time scale, being, the host of many, the ruler of the realm of the dead. So his perspective stretches out a lot longer than ours. And I think for him, he's like, well, I'm here and I will be honest and transparent and answer all of your questions with complete honesty, but I don't feel the need to over explain myself or show off. I mean, that's just not really his nature. So there's that. And there's like, that's one piece of it, right? With the, he is very accessible. I just think that he doesn't, feel the need to show off, basically. The other part of it is that, in particular, you're talking about the third chapter of the book, which is the book that talks about Hades and Persephone and the myth of Persephone's abduction. And that's the Hades himself. The reason that, not much is known about him is he doesn't have a central myth, right? So the mythology that most people know about him is actually from the Homeric Hymn to Demeter too, which is basically the story of Demeter's search for Persephone after she's abducted to the underworld. And it's really a story about Demeter and an allegory for like the changing of seasons and things like that. And Hades taking Persephone to the underworld is sort of the inciting incident in the story. And So that's what a lot of people know about him, basically. It's not even the main character, honestly.
Right.
So you have to go and look for Hades in unexpected places. You have to pull him out of philosophy. You have to pull him out of ancient artwork. You have to pull him out of plays and different things, because there's little fragments of him kind of scattered everywhere, but he doesn't have that central myth that a lot of other deities have. And the story of Hades and Persephone was actually, that was the chapter I was most intimidated to write because I wanted to handle the material well, because I think it's very important to recognize that that is a difficult myth. And,
Very, yes.
because, a young woman is abducted and potentially assaulted by someone. And we don't really have a whole lot of details about why it happened, what she thought about it, all those other things. Like the myths don't really tell us. So the only thing that was really clear is that she was surprised enough to sort of like scream or yell or make a noise, and then Hades abducted her. So again, like usual, I went and asked Hades to retell that to me from his perspective. And you'll notice in the narrative piece in my book, he doesn't. I think that he has some regrets about his actions a little bit. And it was kind of a learning process for him as well. And then, with Persephone, not knowing if she says yes or no, it's very tempting to fall into feminist retellings where Persephone has agency and she chooses these things, right? I would love to fall into that as well. But as far as my own conversations with them have been, I've never gotten a clear answer from Persephone ever. And I talk about, the idea that this is maybe part of the magic of that myth, because here it is, like 2 millennia or more later, and we're still talking about it. We still can't figure it out. We still have these conversations about it, and it still brings up a lot of feelings. And I think that, when we have those conversations about agency, bodily autonomy, assault, things like that, we have those conversations. It makes us kinder, more compassionate humans. And I think that there's some magic in that. And perhaps that's why we still can't figure it out.
I love that, because it's part of that shadow work process where we have to realize that we don't always do the best things, where sometimes we're the cause of the misery, and we have to atone for that, or we have to question it. We have to think outside that box of what was who were we then, and who are we now? And the relationships we carry through that. And I really think that this was a great way for Hades to reflect that maybe she would have, but I don't even know. Like she's not saying.
Yeah. So, and that's that was also one of the reasons when I first started kind of going, kind of like dipping my toe into having a relationship with Hades. I was like, can I reconcile that within myself? Can I reconcile like the Hades and Persephone story, being, a feminist from the way back of course I do not, condone like any sort of, behavior that is, the kidnapping, the assault, the lack of agency, lack of consent, all of those things. Of course, like those things are just so against my code of ethics. So yeah, I had to do a lot of kind of, just kind of personal, like figuring out like how I felt about that and what I thought about that. And could I reconcile these feelings, these like deep, heartfelt, devotional feelings I had for Hades with this part of the mythology? So yeah, it was a challenging and interesting process. And I think it's still ongoing too, right? So yeah, and yeah.
I can really relate to that because I'll start a little bit in the beginning. I started my first journey with a male deity. When I first came to the craft, I came because, men had victimized me in my life, and I needed healing from that. And I needed to step into my feminine power, and I needed to feel empowered in my strength, and I was only going to work with goddesses. I was never going to circle with somebody who identified as a man. And I had very strong opinions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, I get that.
and that's where I came to it from. But then I was first a solitary practitioner. Then I found my coven, and my coven is actually, it actually recently was croned by my high priestess, but the coven I was initiated through was mixed gender. And that seemed to go okay. And so I started to open my mind a little bit to gods and, be a little comfortable with the divine masculine. And then I met Hephaestus. And I still to this day have yet to meet somebody else who works with Hephaestus. So anybody listening, please email me or DM me on Instagram, because I'd love to meet you. But he has helped me so much with healing my relationship with the divine masculine. I still remember the exact moment, because he was trying to connect with me for a little while before I accepted it. Like I wasn't sure I was down with it, at first. And I was listening to a song by Dave the Bard called Green and Gray. And it's
I love that song. I love that song.
I play a game with myself when it comes on shuffle and when I'm in the car and I'm singing along. How far can I get in before I get choked up and emotional? Like when I'm singing along. It's so moving to me, to think of the divine masculine and how it's been perverted by patriarchy, and how we can peel back those layers. And even myself, I identify as a woman fully, but I do want to bring balance to the masculine parts of myself. And I do want to engage with that. So in the past few months, only literally since, as this comes out, it'll be the past year, but since February of 2024, I've been doing rituals with a Hellenic polytheist group, the only inclusive Hellenic polytheist group in Greece, called Labris. And we've done rituals to Zeus. We've done rituals to Dionysius. I've worked with Apollo now through these rituals. And I felt so validated by reading your experiences with Hades, because I feel the same way. And even in my personal visits to Poseidon, I take people to Sunio every chance I get, because to me, it's the best sunset in the whole world. And Poseidon has that almost a grandfatherly energy that just does not come across in a single primary source. So all that to say, the divine masculine is something I think we need to look at and be more reflective of. And like Leandra said, what's the lesson here? What did Hades learn from this experience? What was he helping us to learn from that experience? How can we see different perspectives on this myth? And we could talk about Persephone and her experiences for another 2,400 years and keep coming to new conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like you, Hades is the first male deity that I really introduced into my entire pagan practice. I mean, I eventually, I became a pagan and started a magical practice of rituals and spell workings and things like that when I was in my early 20s. But I was raised in the Christian church. I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and I, come just fresh out of college with my feminist philosophy degree and all of that stuff. I was just fired up to, work with the goddess and study the goddess. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with male deities and patriarchy and all that stuff. Y'all can just go over there, and I'm going to be over here, and I'm going to work with the goddess. And I belonged to a women's tradition, an inclusive women's tradition that was based on the stories from the Mabinogion, so the Welsh cycle of mythology. And we worked with 5 goddesses, and that was my exclusive practice for about 15 years until Hades just sort of literally just presented himself. It was kind of it was an accident, honestly. I was chosen to be on a ritual facilitation team for a camp. It was a week-long camp, and we had to plan 5 or 6 rituals. And the theme of the camp was Persephone's descent. So they were working with the myth. And, all of us on the facilitation team were like, okay, well, we're each going to take one of the characters in the story, and we're going to study them and kind of bring that to the ritual planning process and kind of bring their energy to the camp, because we thought that would be a good way to do it. And literally, I just waited till the very end to pick, and no one had chosen Hades. He was kind of like the last kid on the playground, I was like, I'm like, poor Hades. I almost felt sorry for him. And one of the deities that I still work with a lot, she's one of my patrons, very beloved patron, is Caradwyn. And if you know anything about Caradwyn, she's a Welsh goddess, and she's very earthy herself, like very chthonic herself, kind of got that earthy energy, a little bit of a tough love or a tough mother energy. And so Hades didn't really intimidate me. I'm like, oh, it's kind of that vibe, like it'll be fine. And that was, that was in 2016. And here we are now. And I wrote a whole book about him.
That's so, it's so beautiful. You may have noticed that here at the Magic Kitchen podcast, we don't have sponsored ads. That's because this is a fully listener-supported show. We do what we do for you, dear listener, and when you join my magical living community on Patreon, you're supporting all the time and energy that goes into setting up podcast interviews, writing articles and rituals, my paranormal mystery novel, and all that I do. If you love this podcast, consider joining my magical space. I can't wait to meet you and be an even bigger part of your magical journey. Go to patreon.com/Elise Wells or follow the link in the show notes. So I love more than anything when I come across a practice in a book that I've never done before, and you talk about fluid condensers. I've never in my life made one or even heard of them. So could you tell us about fluid condensers and how, why they're a good choice for Hades and how people can use them?
Oh, okay. So fluid condensers, it comes from sort of the like Western magical tradition. It was really heavily like the influence of Franz Barden and some other folks that were really into like hermetics and things like that. That's kind of the lineage of where this comes from. But in my practice, basically if you're working in ritual and you're inviting a deity to be in the ritual circle with you, it's nice for them to have a place to be, sort of like a container to sort of hold them. And a fluid condenser is a really effective way to do that. Water is a good conductor of energy anyway. So, basically a fluid condenser, you sort of brew it like a tea almost, and you can add lots of different things to them. Mine tend to be herbal based. So they have I like to incorporate numerology when I make them. So they might have like 3 plants or 6 plants or 9 plants, like that kind of thing. And basically you're making a sacred tea that you're infusing kind of with your energy and your intent. And then when you're bringing it into the ritual circle, you are asking the deity to sort of come into that fluid condenser and sort of rest there, like for the working, sort of as like a focal point or a container for their etheric energy. And it's cool. It's a really cool way to focus that energy and to feel it in your ritual circle. And then if you use something that's non-toxic to make it, like, your herbs are safe for ingestion, when the ritual is over, you can either, you sort of release the deity back out of the condenser and you can, offer it to the land or whatnot. You can also drink it if you are adventurous and you want to more fully embody the energy of the working or understand the energy of the deity, because that condenser, after the ritual is over, is still kind of supercharged with their energy. So it's another magical tool kind of in your toolkit, and another way of adding, like layering in more correspondences to your magical work. So yeah, condensers are fun.
So cool. And I think you mentioned in the book about adding, or traditionally maybe only it was added, you would add a pure metal like gold or silver. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, like, I have a pure silver ring that I actually was lucky enough. I got it in Ireland, and I'll show you, it's a Claddagh ring. And I was able to bless it at Bridget's Well in County Clare. So it's been with me through my initiation as well as a priestess in my tradition. And so when I read that, I was like, that would be beyond perfect to use, but will it hurt the ring if I add a ring? It's a pure silver ring, but would it ruin the ring if I add it to this thing?
No. I mean, what it will, though, you will find that, so I mean, I do mention like putting a piece of metal in there. And one of the reasons that I like to do that is I have like a ring that I wear only in ritual. And it's a silver ring, and I add it into the condenser, not only because of its resonance, like, its energetic resonance. So, all metals, all stones, all plants have a certain alignment and resonance. So not only for that reason, but when you're making the condenser, it's almost like putting your signature in it, right? So, so it's kind of a signal to all of the unseen ones, all the the ethereal beings out there, the deities. They're kind of, you're adding sort of your magical signature in there, especially if you're using it every single time you make the condenser. It wouldn't hurt your ring. I mean, you're basically putting it in something that has the temperature of like water that's boiling for tea. It's probably not going to hurt your ring. But what it will do is it will especially if you're using it over time, like over months, over years, over decades, your ring will be incredibly infused with magical energy. So like if you have a certain piece of jewelry that you want to use in this manner, just, make sure you're okay with that.
Yeah. Oh, so actually, yeah, maybe that would be too overwhelming for it to be because I wear this all the time everywhere.
Oh yeah,
So,
that's that's up to you.
Piece.
Like choose your own adventure when it comes to that.
That's something to think about.
No, I can just see you with your hand out in the air. You're like, oh my God, it's vibrating. I can't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Now I'm thinking about this. Yeah. Because I do charge this ring on full moons, and I it's a magical ring, but I do wear it everywhere as part of that magic. So now this gives me a chance maybe to find another exciting ring too.
Yeah. And like I said, I have a very animist perspective. So I tend to, when I am, so if I'm making a condenser, say, and this is kind of like what Leandra was talking about. I will kind of I call it my Narnia cabinet because it looks like a big wardrobe. So I'll open my Narnia cabinet, which is where I have like my herbal supplies and magical tools and things. And I'll kind of call out like, okay, who wants to be in the condenser? I need 6 volunteers. And so, I'll gather those things. And with the talisman or the piece of jewelry that I use, I mean, I ask it permission, and I really do try intuitively to feel whether or not it wants to partner with me in that work. And I do that with crystals too, with stones, with other things. And some people might find that silly, but I just do it out of respect. I think it's important to respectfully interact with everything in the world, especially things that you might be using in magic and spiritual practice.
Are you enjoying the show? If you are, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review. It helps us to reach more listeners like you and to keep doing the Magic Kitchen podcast. Thank you.
I want to talk about snakes.
Okay. Let's talk about snakes.
I love working with serpent energy. One of my patrons is Tiamat or Namu, depending on where you're pulling her from. And, we were talking about the male aspect, her partner, Absu. And I always think like we're so afraid of snakes, but they're that primordial symbol of rebirth, renewal, creation. What role do snakes play in Hades and with Hades?
It's really interesting. I haven't found a piece of like a fragment of text or anything like that where it talks specifically about snakes in relation to Hades. But what I have seen is snakes and Hades in art, and especially in statuary. So if you go and maybe you can do a link to this in your show notes, but look at the Necromantion, the Hades temple that was in Turkey at Hierapolis. There's basically a recreation of the Hades statue that was there in antiquity, and it's Hades seated, and he's got Cerberus, his 3-headed dog, by him, and on the other side is a snake that has its tail like wound in a spiral. And so it's really interesting that snakes are like featured with him in imagery. And I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that they slither on their bellies on the ground. So they're they're constantly connected to the earth, right? And I think also there's like that shedding of the skin. So it's kind of, that and the image of the Ouroboros, or the snake eating its own tail. All of that kind of speaks to the transmigration of the soul, like the continual birth and death cycle, which is a part of ancient Greek mythology. There was a belief in the transmigration of the soul. And interestingly, it was actually the default condition to be dead. Being alive was the exception.
Interesting.
At Eleusis, there is a carving of a man sitting in a chair with a snake curved around the wheel of this chariot chair. And I think it's the Hierophant's chair that's in this image. But again, the Eleusinian Mysteries was a celebration of Persephone, and Hades was very involved in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was basically one of the only times that he wasn't unseen in the ancient world, right? As when he shows up as kind of the consort, like a fertility consort almost, with Persephone. So snakes are great.
So one last question. If there is any one piece of advice you would give for people who are struggling to reconcile death, like they're having an unhealthy relationship with the concept of death in some way, what would be your advice for them as somebody who works so closely with the Lord of the Underworld?
That's an excellent question. I think I first of all have to say, if you're struggling with death in a way that it's impacting your daily life, please see a therapist. Like that would be my magical practice, and deity work is never a substitute for professional medical or mental health work. So make sure that you're taking good care of yourself first and foremost in that way. But if it's something that you're just kind of, struggling with, or maybe being a little avoidant or extremely death avoidant in our modern Western society, I think people, oftentimes feel like they need to tackle their fears in a big way all at once. I think you could start very, very small with very small acts. Even the act of recognizing that plants and animals died for your lunch is a good way to start, because something has to die for something else to live. And just realizing that even on that small level, that death is surrounding us all the time, right? Maybe if it feels right and okay with you, maybe you can find a cemetery and just take a walk. Like don't with really no purpose other than to just kind of walk through and feel what you feel and see what comes up. Another thing, if you, one of the things that really like acquainted me with death as sort of a mystical process and like a magical transition is volunteering in hospice. So if you really want to see, kind of to see death as it's sort of happening, or entering and exiting rooms and things like that, that's another thing that you can do. It's been like the biggest honor of my life to be present when people are making that transition from living to dead. And that's hugely, hugely impactful and has been on the way that I see death. Just things like that. Things like, I know people that are really sensitive to drive in their car and see animals that have accidentally died because of traffic and things like that. And so they've come up with a solution of hanging a little bell in their car that they can ring every time that they pass an animal on the side of the road, which I think is a really nice way to honor that kind of thing. Like I said, just start really small and be in your body and be in the moment. And feel what you feel, right? And don't judge it, because one of the other things I've learned is that death brings up the whole spectrum of emotions. People laugh, some people cry, some people yell, some people, shut down. It brings up a whole spectrum of things, and all of those things are natural. There's nothing that's not okay to feel. And just kind of, maybe however you like to keep track of your experiences. Maybe you like to journal, maybe you like to do art, maybe you like to track it in some other way. Just kind of track your changes over time, and maybe, give yourself a pretty generous span of time, and just say, over this span of time, I'm going to maybe pay attention to what's coming up, and just be gentle. Take little steps, take, little bites of things. And if you get too overwhelmed, seek out a trusted buddy to talk to, or your therapist, or just take a step back from it. Go do something else. You can always come back later. That's not going anywhere.
Right. That's very good. Yes.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, how can our... Oh,
I was just going to say, this is super fun. I could talk about this stuff all day.
oh my gosh, I know. It's, yeah, and this is a conversation I'll keep thinking about, and this is a book I'm going to keep referencing as well. Like, there's so many things. Like, if people are listening and they're like, I don't know if maybe Hades isn't for me, this book is still worth reading, because there's more depth and analysis and like the way you introduce so many magical tools and so many practices. Like, it's not your, candle spells on every page. Like, it's just so different. Like, it's so rich. I just can't believe how much you got across in such a, like, it's not the longest book. Like, it's not 7,000 pages, like, but it's just rich. Not. It's dense. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's very succinct.
Well, thank you. Basically, if you're reading it and you don't want to build a relationship with Hades, but you want to build a relationship with someone else, you can apply the book toward that effort, right? Because basically, I want to give people a good foundation, and kind of, take them from, A to Z. How do you do this? Well, this is how. So I think that you can still get something out of this, even if at the end you're like, it's fun, but Hades isn't my jam.
Yeah, it's just the context that the world's been missing for who Hades really is, and a look at what a practice that's more comfortable with death can really look like too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed writing it. And I've actually been talking to some of my editors at Llewellyn, and I think the next book that I'm going to write is going to be about death priestixing. And I use the word priestix with an X on the end to make it more gender neutral.
Love that.
And so it's going to go into more depth about kind of what we were just talking about, becoming more acquainted with death in its many forms. And kind of how, as like priestixes at the threshold of that, like how do we work that magic? How do we ease those transitions? How do we help both the living and the dead, kind of like, communicate with each other? How do we, just all kinds of different things kind of surrounding that. So I think that's probably where I'm going next.
Oh, that's so exciting.
It is exciting.
So how can people follow you and keep up to date and know when your next book is coming out?
Okay, sure. So my website is a good place to start. It's jamiewaggoner.com. And I actually do quite a few events, both online and in person during the year. And so you can kind of see on there where I'm going to be, if I'm going to be at a bookstore or a conference or whatnot. Get on my newsletter list. You can do that from the website, and you'll get all the announcements there. And I also have a teaching program called Way of the Weaver. And that way, the wayoftheweaver.com is the website. And that's what I was talking about with, teaching people how to approach deity relationships and things like that. We teach lots of different topics. And we have camps in Vermont. We have a summer camp coming up in June. That's really fun. It's like going away to a camp in the woods, only you're doing magic week. So that's really fun. And Murphy is my collaborator in that program. And Murphy and I also have a podcast. And in fact, we have an episode that's dropping on the 13th that is all about trance journey. So if you want to hear more about that, you can check that out. And you can get that anywhere you get your podcasts. So I think those are the main things.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. We're so excited to know you now. And I hope lots of people get to dive into the myth, magic, and modern devotion of Hades.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great book.
Yes,
So
thank you
good.
so much.
Merry meet
Merry part and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magic Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elise Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.